In 1700, the average person in England consumed about 4 pounds of sugar per year. By 1800, that number had jumped to 18 pounds. Today, we're talking over 100 pounds annually. But here's what's really wild. This wasn't just a change in diet. This was a rewiring of human desire, a reshaping of global economies, and the fuel behind some of history's darkest chapters. Sugar didn't just sweeten our food, it changed who we are. Think about the last time you craved something sweet. That pull, that urge, it feels natural, doesn't it? Almost primal. And in a way, it is. But what if I told you that the intensity of that craving, the way sugar dominates our culture, our celebrations, even our daily habits, is actually a relatively recent development in human history? For thousands of years, sweetness was rare. A handful of berries. Wild honey if you were lucky. Then, in the span of just a few centuries, sugar went from being a luxury that only kings could afford to something so common we don't even think about it. And that transformation didn't happen by accident. We're going to trace the journey of sugar from obscure tropical grass to global commodity. We'll see how it reshaped empires, drove the slave trade, sparked revolutions, and fundamentally altered human behavior in ways we're still grappling with. This is the story of how one substance became so powerful that it literally changed the course of history. Let's go back to where it all started, New Guinea, around 8000 BCE. Sugarcane is a tall grass, and for the people who first encountered it, it was nothing more than that, a plant you could chew on to get a sweet taste. The practice of extracting and processing sugar took thousands of years to develop. By around 500 BCE, people in India had figured out how to crystallize sugar from cane juice. This was revolutionary, but sugar remained incredibly labor-intensive to produce. For most of ancient history, sugar was medicine, not food. Persian physicians used it in remedies. Arab traders carried it along the Silk Road, but in such small quantities that it was worth its weight in silver. In medieval Europe, sugar was kept in locked boxes alongside other precious spices. Only the extremely wealthy ever tasted it. But here's where things get interesting. The human brain is hardwired to seek out sweetness. In nature, sweet usually means safe calories, ripe fruit, and energy. Our ancestors, who had a stronger response to sweetness, had a survival advantage. They sought out more calorie-dense foods. They thrived. We inherited that drive. For millennia, this craving couldn't really be exploited because sweetness was so scarce. Then came the age of exploration, and everything changed. When Christopher Columbus set sail in 1492, he brought sugarcane cuttings with him to the Caribbean. He probably didn't realize he was carrying the seed of a revolution. The Caribbean islands turned out to be perfect for sugar cultivation. Hot, humid, with rich soil and plenty of rain. But there was a problem. Growing sugarcane is backbreaking work. Harvesting it is even worse. The cane has to be cut at exactly the right time, then crushed and boiled within hours, or the sugar content drops. You need massive amounts of labor, and it needs to be constant. The Spanish, Portuguese, and later the British and French found their solution in the transatlantic slave trade. And here's where we need to understand something crucial. Sugar didn't just benefit from slavery. In many ways, sugar created the scale and the economic model that made the slave trade as vast as it became. Between the 16th and 19th centuries, an estimated 12 million Africans were forcibly transported to the Americas. The majority, roughly 70%, went to work on sugar plantations. The mortality rate was staggering. In some Caribbean colonies, the average life expectancy for an enslaved person on a sugar plantation was just 7 years after arrival. Why was sugar worth this unimaginable human cost? Because back in Europe, something fundamental was shifting in human behavior. People were becoming addicted, not in the clinical sense we use today, but addicted in the way that sugar was becoming not just desired, but expected, required, woven into the fabric of daily life. And this addiction would reshape the global economy in ways no one saw coming. In the 1600s, two things happened simultaneously that would change everything. Sugar production in the Caribbean ramped up dramatically, and Europe discovered coffee and tea. Before this, Europeans drank ale for breakfast. It was safer than water and provided calories. But coffee and tea offered something different: alertness, a pick-me-up, a moment of pleasure. There was just one problem: both beverages are naturally bitter. Enter sugar. The combination was explosive. By the early 1700s, coffee houses were popping up across London, Paris, Amsterdam, and in every single one, people were spooning sugar into their cups. What had been a luxury was becoming a necessity. The British, in particular, became obsessed. Tea with sugar became a national ritual, a marker of civility, a social glue. But here's what's fascinating from a behavioural standpoint. Sugar wasn't just making these drinks taste better. It was changing how people experienced them. The sweetness triggered dopamine release in the brain, the same neurotransmitter associated with reward and pleasure. People began to crave not just the caffeine, but the sweet caffeine. The two became inseparable. Historians like Sidney Mintz have argued that this moment represents one of the first times in history that a mass population developed a learned, culturally reinforced craving for a specific substance. Sugar transformed from food to something more like a drug. And just like with any valuable commodity, control over sugar meant power. By the 18th century, tiny Caribbean islands were generating more wealth for European powers than entire continental colonies. Jamaica alone was considered more valuable to the British Empire than the 13 American colonies combined. Why? Sugar. The plantation system created a triangle of trade that enriched European merchants and governments. Manufactured goods from Europe went to Africa, enslaved people from Africa went to the Caribbean, and sugar from the Caribbean went to Europe. The profits were reinvested in more ships, more trade, more expansion. Sugar money built much of London, Bristol, and Liverpool. Wealthy sugar plantation owners, often absentee landlords living in luxury in England, became members of Parliament. They shaped laws. They protected their interests. The sugar lobby was one of the most powerful political forces in Britain for over a century. And here's the twisted part. While enslaved people suffered unimaginable brutality to produce sugar, European working classes were beginning to depend on it too. Sugar provided cheap calories. A working family could stretch their budget by buying bread and sugar instead of more expensive proteins. Factory workers could get a quick energy boost from sweet tea during their shifts. Sugar became the fuel of the Industrial Revolution, literally. It kept workers going through long, grueling shifts in textile mills and factories. The same substance that enriched the elite also became a tool to keep the working poor productive. This created a kind of behavioural lock-in across all social classes. Everyone had a reason to want more sugar, even as the human cost of producing it became increasingly clear. But nothing lasts forever. And when the sugar system finally began to crack, it would take a revolution, several revolutions actually, to break it apart. The Haitian Revolution, which began in 1791, was the largest and most successful slave rebellion in history. Enslaved people in the French colony of Saint-Domingue rose up against their oppressors, and after 13 years of brutal warfare, they won. Haiti became the first free black republic in the Americas. The impact on the sugar trade was immediate and catastrophic, for the slave owners at least. Saint-Domingue had been producing about 40% of the world's sugar. Suddenly, that supply was gone. Prices spiked. European powers scrambled to increase production elsewhere, but the message was clear. The system was vulnerable. Meanwhile, in Britain, the abolitionist movement was gaining strength. People like William Wilberforce and Thomas Clarkson campaigned tirelessly against slavery. But here's what's often overlooked. Part of their strategy was to convince ordinary British people to stop buying slave-produced sugar. Pamphlets circulated showing the connection between a lump of sugar in your tea and the suffering of enslaved people thousands of miles away. Sugar boycotts became a form of moral protest. Some estimates suggest that as many as 300,000 people participated, refusing to buy sugar from slave plantations. This was behavioural change on a massive scale, driven by moral outrage. And it worked, at least partially. The British abolished the slave trade in 1807 and slavery itself in 1833. But sugar production didn't stop, it just shifted. After abolition, plantation owners turned to indentured labourers from India and China, people who were technically free but worked under conditions that were often barely distinguishable from slavery. The global appetite for sugar was too strong. The behavioural patterns were too deeply ingrained. The 19th century brought another revolution: sugar beets. Scientists discovered that the same sweet substance in tropical sugarcane could be extracted from a humble root vegetable that grew perfectly well in European climates. Napoleon Bonaparte, eager to break Britain's control of the sugar trade, heavily promoted beet sugar production in France. This was a game changer. For the first time, sugar could be produced locally in temperate climates. Germany, Russia, and other European countries built massive beet sugar industries. Production costs dropped, supply increased, and sugar became even more ubiquitous. By the late 1800s, sugar was no longer a luxury at all. It was everywhere. Candy became a children's treat. Sweetened condensed milk appeared, chocolate bars, soft drinks. Each innovation created new ways to consume sugar, new contexts for sweetness, new behavioural habits. And here's where the story gets really relevant to us. This is when sugar stopped being something people consciously chose and started being something that was just always there, lurking in the background of modern life. Fast forward to the 20th century and sugar becomes nearly invisible. Not because we consume less of it, we consume more than ever, but because it hides in plain sight. Walk down a supermarket aisle and start reading labels. You'll find sugar in bread, in crackers, in pasta sauce, in salad dressing, in supposedly healthy yogurt. It goes by dozens of names: high fructose corn syrup, dextrose, maltose, agave nectar, fruit juice concentrate. The food industry discovered that sugar does more than sweeten. It adds bulk, it improves texture, it extends shelf life, and most importantly, it makes people want more. Studies have shown that sugar activates the same reward pathways in the brain as addictive drugs. Not identical, but similar enough that food manufacturers pay very close attention. In the 1970s and 80s, when fat was demonized as the cause of heart disease, the food industry pivoted hard toward low-fat products. But fat carries flavor. Take it out and food tastes like cardboard. The solution? Add sugar. Lots of it. This wasn't a conspiracy exactly, but it also wasn't an accident. Food scientists engineered products to hit what they call the bliss point, the optimal level of sweetness that triggers maximum cravings and repeat consumption. This is behavioral manipulation on an industrial scale. The results are all around us. Obesity rates have tripled since 1975. Type 2, diabetes, once rare, is now a global epidemic. Tooth decay, heart disease, fatty liver disease, all linked to excessive sugar consumption. The World Health Organization now recommends that added sugars make up less than 10% of daily calories. But in many Western countries, people regularly exceed that by 2 or 3 times. We've created a food environment where consuming massive amounts of sugar is the default, and avoiding it requires constant vigilance and effort. So, who benefits from all this sugar consumption? The answer tells us a lot about where power lies in the modern world. A handful of massive corporations control most of the global sugar trade: Coca-Cola, PepsiCo, Nestle, Mars, Mondelez. These companies spend billions on marketing, lobbying, and research. They fund studies that downplay sugar's health risks. They fight regulations like soda taxes or restrictions on marketing to children. In 2016, it came out that the sugar industry had paid Harvard researchers back in the 1960s to publish studies blaming fat, not sugar, for heart disease. This shifted the entire conversation about nutrition for decades and influenced government dietary guidelines. This is power. Not the military power of the empire, but the soft power of shaping what people believe, what they want, what they see as normal. And it's global. Coca-Cola has operations in more than 200 countries. In many developing nations, sugary drinks are more available and more affordable than clean water. The behavioral patterns established in the West are being exported worldwide, along with the health consequences. Sugar remains what it has always been: a tool of power. The players have changed, but the fundamental dynamic hasn't. Which brings us to the question, can we change this? Can we break behavioural patterns that have been centuries in the making? There are signs that the tide might be turning, at least in some places. Several countries have implemented sugar taxes on soft drinks with measurable results. Mexico's tax led to a 12% reduction in sugary drink purchases in the first year. Berkeley, California, saw a 21% drop. When sugar becomes more expensive, people consume less. Food labelling is improving. Some countries now require clear warnings on products high in sugar. Education campaigns are teaching people to read labels and recognise hidden sugars. There's a growing movement toward whole foods and cooking from scratch. But here's the reality. Changing behaviour at scale is incredibly hard, especially when that behaviour has been reinforced for generations and is actively promoted by powerful industries with billions of dollars at stake. Neuroscience works against us too. That dopamine hit from sugar, it doesn't go away just because you know it's happening. Knowing that sugar is bad for you doesn't make you crave it less. If anything, restriction can sometimes make cravings stronger. What does seem to work is changing the environment, making healthy options cheaper and more convenient, reducing exposure to marketing, creating social contexts where low sugar eating is normalized and supported. This isn't really about individual willpower. It's about designing systems that make healthy behaviour easier than unhealthy behaviour, which is exactly the opposite of what the sugar industry spent centuries creating. Let's zoom back out and look at the whole picture. Sugar started as a rare exotic luxury. Through a combination of colonialism, slavery, industrialization, and sophisticated marketing, it became one of the most ubiquitous substances on Earth. Along the way, it reshaped economies, built empires, fueled revolutions, and fundamentally altered human behaviour and biology. The story of sugar is the story of how human desires can be manufactured, exploited, and turned into profit and power. It's a story of how behavioural change happens, not all at once, but gradually, as cultural norms shift and new habits take hold. And it's not over. Right now, the sugar industry is fighting to maintain its position in the face of growing health concerns. New sweeteners are being developed and marketed. The battle over what we eat and how much sugar is acceptable continues to play out in laboratories, legislatures, and supermarket aisles. Understanding this history doesn't just satisfy curiosity. It gives us tools to see the present more clearly. When you reach for that candy bar or soda, you're participating in patterns of behaviour that go back centuries. You're connected to a global system of production and profit that spans continents. That doesn't mean you shouldn't enjoy sweet things, but it does mean being aware of how those cravings were shaped, who benefits from them, and what the real costs have been, both historical and ongoing. The next time you taste something sweet, remember, you're tasting history. You're tasting power. You're tasting the substance that changed the world. If you found this deep dive into sugar's hidden history fascinating, the Origin Archive has plenty more where that came from. We dig into the surprising origins of everyday things and reveal the forces that shaped the modern world. Hit that subscribe button so you don't miss the next investigation. We're exploring everything from the true story of chocolate to how coffee rewired global trade. And let us know in the comments. Were you surprised by how much sugar has influenced world history? What other everyday items do you want us to investigate next? Thanks for watching. Keep questioning the origins.